Welcome back to our channel. Hope you all are fine and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's begin with another day of aviation miracle. It was supposed to be an ordinary morning. The skies above Los Angeles International Airport glowed soft orange, and the horizon shimmered like melted gold. Passengers lined up at Gate 47, unaware that in a few hours, this same flight number, Oceanic Air 237, would be making headlines around the world. Among the travelers was Ava Thompson, a 22-year-old aviation student. She carried nothing extraordinary, a backpack, a small logbook, and a quiet fascination for airplanes. This trip to Tokyo was meant to mark the beginning of her internship at an aviation training center. For Ava, it was the first step toward her dream of becoming a pilot. Inside the terminal, families hugged goodbye. Children ran between seats. Flight attendants smiled politely, and the captain's voice over the PA promised a smooth 11-hour journey across the Pacific. Everything looked perfect. At 9:15 a.m., the Boeing 787 taxied smoothly onto runway 24L. The engines roared to life, a deep, confident sound that seemed eternal. The aircraft lifted into the sky, slicing through scattered clouds. From inside, the world below looked calm, cities shrinking, the ocean widening, sunlight glittering across the waves. Ava sat by the window in seat 17A, sketching cockpit diagrams in her notebook. To her, every instrument had a personality, the altimeter's quiet spin, the gentle pulse of the flight director. She smiled, feeling peace in the rhythm of flight. But far ahead, beyond what radar screens yet displayed the sky, was hiding something. A storm formation, hundreds of miles wide, invisible at first, was brewing across the central Pacific. Meteorologists later said it had formed faster than any system that week. At cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, the flight was smooth. Lunch service began, children watched movies, and the cabin filled with the smell of reheated meals and coffee. Nothing hinted at danger. But inside the cockpit, the first warning signs appeared. Minor electrical interference flickered across the flight displays. Probably solar static, the first officer murmured. The captain nodded but kept an eye on the radar, small dots of yellow forming. Nothing serious. Back in the cabin, Ava noticed subtle vibrations. She knew turbulence by feel, but this wasn't turbulence. It was something heavier, like the plane was wrestling invisible air. She glanced up, noticing one of the overhead bins trembling slightly. Then the seatbelt sign blinked on. A calm voice echoed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered a bit of rough air. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The plane shook mildly at first, then harder. Glasses clinked. Someone gasped. Through Ava's window, clouds thickened. Dark shapes began to swirl where blue once was. She felt her heartbeat quicken, not from fear, but awareness. The cockpit crew was adjusting altitude, but the vertical speed indicator wasn't stabilizing. Minutes later, turbulence struck violently. A sharp drop, 300 feet, then 500. Oxygen masks rattled in their housings. Somewhere near the left wing, a faint flash of light lightning. Then another closer. Inside the cockpit, the radar display suddenly bled red and purple. They were entering an unforecasted supercell thunderstorm, one that had rapidly expanded over open water. "Captain, we should turn around," the first officer said urgently. "Too late. We're in it," the captain replied. The engines groaned as they adjusted thrust. The flight attendants struggled to stay upright, holding on to seatbacks. Then, a noise none of them would ever forget, a loud metallic bang from under the fuselage, followed by a brief shudder that ran the length of the aircraft. In the cabin, people screamed. The lights flickered once, twice, and then steadied. Ava's instincts flared. Her training told her that sound wasn't turbulence. It was structural, maybe mechanical. She looked out the window. The left engine was still running. But something about its rhythm felt off. A faint flicker, an unnatural vibration. She unbuckled slightly, just enough to lean forward. Her eyes locked on the nacelle, a faint orange glow near its base. And then another flash. This time not lightning, a spark. Ava's breath caught. She whispered under her breath, "That's not good." No one else seemed to notice the passengers, too distracted by the storm's violence. But Ava's eyes stayed fixed. The glow was real. Suddenly, the aircraft jolted downward, and an alarm tone echoed through the cabin, sharp, continuous, mechanical. Oxygen masks dropped from above. The passengers panicked, pulling them over their faces. The flight attendants shouted commands over the chaos. Outside, lightning illuminated the aircraft like a ghost rain slamming against the fuselage, engines streaked with firelight. And as Ava gripped the armrest, heart racing, a terrifying realization hit her. This wasn't ordinary turbulence. Something inside that engine was breaking apart. The storm had only begun, and the nightmare was about to start. The spark turned into flame. At first, it was faint, a flicker swallowed by rain and lightning. But within seconds, the left engine of Flight 237 began to glow orange-red, tiny embers spraying like fireflies into the storm. Then came a deafening boom, short, sharp, metallic that echoed through the fuselage. Passengers screamed as the aircraft rolled violently to the left, oxygen masks swinging like pendulums. The lights dimmed, flickered, then came back with a sickly yellow glow. Ava's pulse raced. Her training flashed in her mind. She recognized that sound, an engine surge. The turbine was no longer stable. She looked around, noticing passengers crying, praying, gripping each other's hands. Somewhere behind her, a child was sobbing uncontrollably. She closed her eyes for a second and whispered, "Stay calm. Focus." From the cockpit, an announcement came through the intercom, strained, trembling. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are experiencing a technical malfunction. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." But his voice cracked midway. That single hesitation said everything. Ava needed to know even the captain wasn't certain they could control the situation. The turbulence worsened. The cabin tilted again, and luggage fell from the overhead bins. A coffee pot rolled down the aisle, spilling dark liquid that mixed with rain seeping through the emergency door seal. Ava pressed her forehead to the window through the storm. She could just make out flames licking the engine cowling. She whispered, "It's the compressor. It's eating itself." She wanted to help. Every nerve in her body screamed to move, but passengers were ordered to stay seated. So she observed, watching, listening, studying the vibrations through the airframe. Something deeper was failing. Not just the engine, but the aircraft's hydraulics. Suddenly, the plane lurched downward. The gravity in the cabin flipped for half a second, a brief, horrifying moment of weightlessness. Cups, papers, and even a phone floated midair before, slamming back down as the plane caught itself again. In the cockpit, alarms wailed stall warnings. Hydraulic pressure alerts, fuel imbalance warnings. "Hydraulic fluids dropping fast," the first officer shouted. "Shut down engine 1 before it tears off." The captain barked back. They followed emergency checklists, but the storm made control almost impossible. Rain and ice hammered the windshield. Lightning flashed so close it blinded them. The radar display became a mess of static and red clusters. And then the left engine shut down completely. The aircraft now flew on one engine, fighting crosswinds and rain, its aerodynamic balance destroyed. Inside the cabin, a terrified silence replaced the screaming. The sound of the storm was all that remained, wind tearing at the windows. The deep, uneven drone of the remaining engine trying to hold altitude. Flight attendants moved shakily down the aisles, checking passengers, whispering reassurances they didn't believe. One of them, the same who had calmed Ava earlier, stopped near her row. Her name tag read Mara. Ava leaned forward, voice calm but urgent. Mara blinked in shock, then hurried forward toward the cockpit. Minutes passed like hours. The aircraft began to drift lower 32,000 feet. 30,000, 28,000. Every drop made Ava's stomach twist, but she knew what was happening. With one engine down, the plane couldn't maintain altitude in that storm. In the cockpit, Captain Matthews stared at the gauges. "Hydraulic system A is gone. System B is unstable. Manual reversion?" Clark suggested. "Try it." They disengaged autopilot, taking full manual control. The yoke stiffened unresponsive. The plane rolled slightly right. And that's when Mara burst into the cockpit, shouting over the alarms. "Captain, there's a passenger who says she's an aviation student. She recognized the hydraulic issue." The captain's eyes flicked toward her. "What's her name?" "Ava Thompson." He hesitated. "Tell her to stay calm. We've got it under control." But deep down, he knew they didn't. The plane's control surfaces were sluggish. The storm was winning. Back in the cabin, Ava could sense the difference. The vibration frequency had changed, not random turbulence now, but mechanical struggle. She unbuckled slightly, watching the attendants whisper urgently near the cockpit door. Then suddenly another sharp bang. The cabin lights went out. Total darkness. Only the faint blue glow of lightning through the windows. Gasps filled the silence. Someone screamed. A baby wailed. Then a loud pop, and emergency lights flickered back on, red and dim. Ava felt the plane bank sharply left, dropping again. The PA crackled. "This is the captain. We've lost one engine and partial hydraulics. Please remain seated. We're diverting to an alternate location." "The left engine's out, right?" Mara froze. "You! How do you know that?" "I'm an aviation student. I can tell by the vibrations. You need to tell the cockpit. Their hydraulic line's compromised." But the storm outside said otherwise. No direction seemed safe. Ava stared through her window, only blackness and flashes of white. Her reflection looked back at her, pale, focused, unblinking. Somewhere deep inside her, a strange calm began to grow that quiet state of mind. She'd always felt inside flight simulators. Her fear was there, yes, but beneath it, something stronger. A certainty, she whispered to herself. If they lose both hydraulics, they'll need manual trim and thrust balancing. Her eyes drifted to the cockpit door, a small rectangle of light, flickering in the distance. Then the unthinkable happened. A massive lightning bolt struck the right wing, a blinding flash followed by the sickening sound of metal cracking. The plane tilted violently sideways, alarms screaming again, passengers shouting in terror. The storm had swallowed Flight 237 whole, and now it was tearing the aircraft apart. The lightning strike changed everything. For a moment, it felt like the world exploded in light. A blinding flash engulfed the cabin, followed by a sound so deep it shook through bone. The aircraft rolled violently, right wing dipping toward the black ocean below. Luggage tore free, masks swung wildly, and screams filled the air. When the lights returned, they were dim, emergency red, flickering across terrified faces. The storm had swallowed Flight 237 whole. Ava gripped the seat back in front of her. Her body trembled, but her eyes, cold, alert, scanned the cabin. She felt the angle of descent, heard the strain in the engines, knew what was happening before anyone said it. They were losing control. Flight attendants stumbled through the aisles, shouting orders that disappeared into the roar of the storm. A child cried for his mother. Someone was praying. The smell of burnt metal and ozone mixed with cabin air, thick and sharp. Then came the captain's voice again, this time faint and distorted. "We've been struck by lightning. Both engines affected. Please remain seated." The announcement cut out mid-sentence static, swallowing his last word. Ava felt the aircraft lurch again. It wasn't just turbulence now. It was a slow, heavy tilt like a wounded bird circling the sky. In that moment, she knew the pilots were fighting for every inch of air. She unbuckled, ignoring the attendant's orders, and made her way down the narrow aisle, steadying herself on seats. A flight attendant, Mara, spotted her and tried to stop her. "Ma'am, please sit down." Ava looked her in the eye, voice firm but calm. "You already told the captain about me. Let me help." Mara hesitated, torn between rules and reality. Then the plane dropped again, throwing both of them against a seat. The decision made itself. She led Ava toward the cockpit. The door slid open to a scene of chaos, the cockpit bathed in red emergency light. Panels flashing warnings, alarms shrieking in layers. The windshield was a sheet of rain and lightning. The captain, John Matthews, gripped the yoke with both hands, sweat glistening on his forehead. His co-pilot, Ethan Clark, was running through checklist pages that were now useless. Too many systems had failed at once. Ava stood at the doorway, rain dripping from her hair, eyes wide but steady. "Captain," she said over the alarms, "you've lost both primary hydraulic lines, haven't you?" The captain turned sharply, startled. "Who are you?" "Ava Thompson, aviation student. I study 787 systems. You can still control with alternate trim if the circuits aren't fried." The co-pilot glanced at the panel, then at her. "She's right, manual stabilizer trim might still respond." The captain hesitated. A stranger, a passenger, was suggesting flight control inputs mid-emergency, but in that chaos, reason outweighed protocol. "All right," he said. "If you know what you're talking about, sit there and call out the readings." Ava slid into the jump seat behind the pilots, heart pounding but focus absolute. The displays were a blur of red. She scanned quickly. Fuel imbalance, Rudder limiter failure, multiple electrical faults. But the secondary systems panel flickered with one faint green light. Manual trim available. She pointed. There! You can stabilize nose pitch with manual input. Use differential thrust, right engine at 70%, left idle. The captain followed her call-outs. Slowly, the aircraft steadied, but just barely. The violent rolling eased into a deep, uneasy sway. Outside, lightning still flashed. But the plane's movements began to find rhythm again. Ava's hands gripped her notebook, the one she'd been sketching earlier. She tore a page and drew a quick schematic. Sir, if you lose full hydraulics, the tail will respond slower. You'll need to anticipate nose drop early. Clark looked at her sketch, then smiled, faintly impressed. You're not just a student, are you? She exhaled, just one who listens carefully. Minutes crawled by. The storm refused to let go. Every second was a fight between gravity and sheer willpower. The aircraft was now at 17,000 feet and descending. The ocean below was invisible, a black void stretching endlessly. The nearest landmass, Midway Atoll, was over 200 miles away. They had no choice but to try to reach it. The captain managed to re-establish partial radio contact. Static filled the frequency as he shouted over the noise. Mayday, mayday, this is Oceanic 237! 2 engines compromised, hydraulics failing, descending through 17,000. The reply came garbled, fragmented, but one phrase stood out. Radar contact lost. Repeat, radar contact lost. They were now alone in the storm. In the cabin, panic had transformed into silence. People were too drained to scream anymore. Some prayed under their breath. Others stared at the windows in hollow shock. Through the cockpit door's small glass pane, a few passengers could see the faint movement of a young woman inside, not a flight attendant, not a crew member, yet clearly, somehow, part of the fight. Ava's calm became the center of the chaos. Her voice, low but confident, cut through the alarms. Trim nose down by 2. Right engine at 65. Hold it steady. The captain obeyed. For a few seconds, the plane stabilized again, straight and level through the thunderclouds. But just as relief began to surface, the altimeter dropped sharply. A massive air pocket, a downdraft, pulled the plane down like an invisible hand. Pull up! Clark shouted. The yoke refused to move. Hydraulics gone completely. Ava leaned forward. Differential thrust! Push the right throttle to 75, now! The captain complied. The right engine screamed, vibrating through the floor. The nose lifted slightly, then steadied. For a few tense seconds, no one breathed. Then silence, the kind that only storms know. The plane leveled. Still alive. Ava leaned back, exhausted. Sweat dripped down her temple, her hands shaking now that adrenaline was fading. The captain turned, eyes wide with gratitude and disbelief. You just saved this aircraft from a flat spin, he said quietly. She gave a faint smile. We're not safe yet. He nodded grimly. No, we're not. But I'd take you in my right seat any day. Far below, waves moved like restless shadows under flashes of lightning. Fuel was running low. Systems were dying one by one. But through sheer teamwork and instinct, the plane still held altitude. And outside, the storm began to thin. Clouds parting slightly, faint moonlight peeking through. It looked like hope. But Ava knew better. When systems fail like this, the real danger begins after the storm. She looked at the flickering fuel gauge, then at the captain. Sir, we may not have enough to reach land. The captain's jaw tightened. The co-pilot's hands froze over the throttles. Ava took a deep breath. We'll have to make a decision soon. One that determines if anyone walks away from this. And with that, Flight 237 kept flying into the darkness, broken, wounded, but not yet defeated. The cockpit trembled as if the sky itself wanted to break the plane apart. The red alarms, the smell of burnt wires, and the sharp metallic taste of fear filled the air. Ava's hands tightened on the yoke, the captain barely conscious beside her, his voice fading under the roaring storm. It's all yours now, Ava. Those words became her command. Outside, lightning flashed for a second. She could see the reflection of her own face in the cockpit glass. Calm but resolute. She wasn't trained to fly a jet like this. Yet instinct told her everything she needed to know. If she didn't act now, 300 lives would vanish into the ocean. She took a deep breath and remembered her father's voice, a pilot who used to say, "When everything fails, the only thing that keeps a plane flying is courage." And so courage became her autopilot. The first engine was gone. The second was flickering between power surges and silence. The aircraft was losing altitude fast. Ava radioed the tower herself, voice trembling but steady. "Mayday, Mayday. This is OceanAir 319. We've lost both engines. Attempting emergency landing. Manual control active." The ground control team went silent for a moment. No one could believe a civilian passenger was now piloting a Boeing 787. Inside the cabin, passengers clung to hope. Some whispered prayers. Others just stared at the shaking ceiling, their tears lost in the flicker of emergency lights. Ava adjusted the pitch slightly nose up. Altitude, 12,000 feet. Speed, 210 knots. Left engine dead, right engine burning. Lightning flashed again, this time close enough to illuminate her face focused, pale and yet strangely fearless. She turned toward the co-pilot seat where the flight officer, half-conscious, whispered, "There's a strip, 20 miles east. You can try it." The map display was mostly gone, but Ava remembered the emergency procedure diagrams she'd once studied for fun. She mentally calculated wind angle, descent rate, glide distance. "We'll make it," she whispered, not to anyone, just to the plane itself. When the clouds finally broke, the faint glow of a coastal airstrip appeared ahead, soaked in rain, half lit, half hidden by fog. Ava lowered the flaps manually, the landing gear partially deployed with a loud metallic groan. The cockpit alarms screamed, but she ignored them. The aircraft was gliding now, no thrust, just gravity and willpower. Every second stretched like eternity. "Come on, just hold together," she whispered. The Boeing 787 touched down, hard sparks flying as the right gear collapsed. The plane skidded across the wet runway, nose slightly tilted, engines scraping metal on asphalt. The passengers screamed once and then silence. When the aircraft finally stopped, it was resting half off the runway, one wing smoking, the other torn. But they were alive, all of them. Emergency crews rushed in under pouring rain. The first person they saw stepping out of the cockpit wasn't a pilot, it was Ava. Her hands were covered in soot, her face streaked with tears and rain. "Is everyone out?" she asked the rescue officer, her voice hoarse but calm. "Yes," he said, still stunned. You just landed a 787? She nodded faintly. "We all did." 3 weeks later, in a bright conference room at the National Air Safety Board, investigators reviewed the flight data recorder. The black box had survived the crash landing, its beeping tone echoing like a ghost of the night that almost ended everything. Chief Investigator Daniel Cruz leaned forward. According to these logs, manual control was re-engaged by passenger ID 17A, not the flight crew. The room went silent. They pulled the cockpit audio. A faint voice emerged amid static, Ava's voice, calm and firm. "If we descend now, we'll never make it. Climb 2 degrees. Hold it steady." Cruz removed his glasses, staring at the waveform on screen. "She didn't just assist," he said quietly. "She flew that plane." Weeks later, media outlets across the world broke the story. Civilian passenger saves 300. Live's OceanAir Flight 319's miracle landing. Videos of the landing spread online, sparks flying, rain pouring, fire trucks chasing the sliding jet. But what gripped the world wasn't the footage. It was the face of the woman who refused to give up. Ava Reyes, age 22, engineering student. No commercial flying license. Her courage rewrote what people believed about instinct, responsibility, and human resilience. Months later, Ava stood near the wrecked fuselage, now resting in a hangar under investigation. Reporters still followed her, but she wasn't there for fame. She placed her hand on the scorched metal and whispered, "You brought them home." The air around her was quiet again, the same quiet that had once terrified her. But now it was peaceful. She looked up at the sky, calm, blue, infinite. For the first time, she smiled. Because she knew sometimes heroes aren't born in uniforms or training simulators. Sometimes they're born in the storm, when everyone else loses control.